A licensing scheme for developers. Let's have a look. Good morning everyone, Florian Heise here and welcome to another episode of Heise Says. I have my stein of coffee and I'll have a sip. That's a good start to the day, and I thought we'd look at an article that was sent to me by a viewer. Now this is a suggestion that's been brought about in Canberra, where they're looking at a licensing scheme for developers. Now I thought we'd have a read of that and have a bit of a talk about it, if it's actually going to, be good. Because think about it. Should people require a license to use a service? Okay, that's the first question that pops to mind. Do you need to be licensed to hire someone to do a service? What is a developer? And now I haven't read the article. I'm just putting these questions out there as prompts to think about some of the implications with this. Because, it may be good. Oh, yeah, let's get those dodgy developers. But more and more, I think it's systematic issues in our construction industry and the way these buildings are procured. I don't know. Let's have a look at this suggestion. So, Australian first licensing scheme that would crack down on developers avoiding debts and defect bills by requiring increased transparency is being considered by the ACT government. A resolution passed by the ACT Labor Conference over the weekend called for the introduction of a developer licensing scheme which would ascribe a number of conditions to developers working in Canberra. Doesn't this just seem as government regulation? It may make it harder for people to do. I'm on two sides of the coin here. I can see both arguments. I can see we want to get rid of the dodginess in the construction industry, but you're also going to limit people's ability to hire someone to do it for you. Maybe not. Maybe I'm overreacting. It would require developers to demonstrate they have the financial and operating capacity to fully complete proposed projects, including being able to address any defects that arise after construction is complete. Okay, I literally spoke yesterday or a day before to a gentleman who's another professional, and he has had a bad debtor, 3 months worth of work he's waiting on, because the developer, the funding for the next stage of the project was withheld by the bank. So, if I could demonstrate, sure, I've got the bank signed up, they're all keen, they're ready to go ahead. Would that be enough to demonstrate that you've got enough financial capacity to do it? Maybe, maybe not. Then what if the bank pulls the plug? Remember, guys, they're a law unto themselves. All they are is risk averse, and some of the stuff they get away with is just really unfair, to be honest. Really sounds unfair. So that's my first question. Is that going to be adding, limiting this sector? And maybe that's what needs to happen. We'll see. Let me know your opinions in the comments, guys. They would be required to disclose how developments are funded, making it more difficult for companies to go into liquidation in order to avoid debts, only to re-emerge as new company, a practice commonly known as phoenixing. Yes, well, true. Maybe the ASIC, maybe ASIC should get a bit more teeth with these people who are doing, dodgy companies. The resolution also called for developers to be made to set up trust accounts to ensure contractors and subcontractors are still paid if a developer goes into liquidation. Well, they have that here in Queensland, or they're in the process of doing this, having trust accounts set up for certain construction projects, and I'll need to look into it in greater detail, to be honest, because I haven't had exposure to it at this stage. Maybe I should look at doing it. Because we've got laws and legislation here in place where if you're a subcontractor, you can make a claim under the Payments Act, but then it gets a bit tricky because it triggers all the requirements under that act, and that can override your contract and cause all these problems. So the motion was brought by the CFMU, whose ACT branch secretary, Jason Omar, said developers had thus far avoided the scrutiny placed on other parts of the industry. There's a bit of a gap. Builders are highly regulated, and so are subcontractors. But developers now are taking a much more proactive role in the projects, and we believe they should not miss out on being regulated. Okay, yeah. Building quality is a hot button issue around the country, with building ministers from all states and territories last week resolving to reform the industry with a consistent national approach. Well, I would suggest rather than looking at putting more burden on here, let's just remove design and construct. Let's just make design and construct not applicable to any habitable building. Why don't we try that? Any development, anything that people will live in, design and construct is not allowed, so there has to be separate status. You know, you can't have the contractor in charge of the whole design team. That has to be separate, and that has to keep that with the developer. That's what I would argue, a more traditional approach, because then you've got different organizations which will ensure, hopefully, a level of quality. Anyway, the concerns were fueled by high-profile incidents of poor building quality at the Opal and Mascot Towers projects in Sydney. Well, and others. Earlier this year, owners of the Elara complex in Canberra North lost a $19 million federal court compensation claim against the complex's developer after court found that they'd failed to claim outside of they'd filed a claim outside of the deadline. I mean, there you go. How about we just forget all of this and just go back to the Babylonian, ancient building code? How about we go back to that? There's some of their requirements there. The owners have been chasing compensation for repairs after the company behind the development went into administration when issues began to arise. Maybe rather than putting all this process in place, just make it a requirement for habitable buildings that developers need to sign personal guarantees. Personal guarantees. So they put their own house on the line, or the house that's in their wife's name on the line. Personal guarantees. What do you think about that suggestion, guys? Let me know what you think about that one in the comments. Steve Mann from the Urban Development Institute of Australia, a peak body for developers, said while he welcomed laws that strengthen the industry, there needs to be a balance to keep development efficient. Well, yeah, see, that my concern is that this is going to act as a way of regulating people out of the sector. And you'll only have the big boys, and then, nothing will change. You'll get a monopoly on people who are developing. There'll only be a certain capacity. It might hurt mum and dad developers or small people that are not presenting the same huge risk as these projects. We're very happy to see that the governments are focusing on this issue. We just don't want overreactions that in fact make the end product less affordable and longer time periods to deliver, he said. We just don't want to see a sort of second layer of certification come into process, which will cause time costs and delays. And I question if it will add security. I still think personal guarantees. Everyone, if you're an investor in this project, you have to put up your house, your personal assets, personal wealth. Can't hide behind a trust or a company. Maybe that's going to be even more onerous than what they're suggesting, but people will take it seriously then. The proposal by ACT Labor would also require licensed developers to nominate a person to take responsibility for its conduct. Oh, look, well, there you go. The motion further proposes a requirement that developers not impose unrealistic deadlines that could result in unsafe work practices or cut corners. Well, yeah, no, that's a good idea in theory. Mr. Omar said that requiring developers to nominate a named representative would improve transparency. It just means that people can't hide behind the corporate veil. Someone's got to be responsible, Mr. Omar said. While the motion was passed by the ACT Labor Conference, it is not binding on government policy. However, ACT Building Quality Minister Gordon Ramsay said the government was closely examining the proposal. The government is currently in the early stages of examining options for proposed developer licensing scheme in the ACT, he said in a statement. We will continue to crack down on dodgy operators in the construction sector, with increased levels of enforcement and compliance activity on building sites around the territory. Industry has been clearly put on notice that government will not tolerate building work that was not of a high standard, and neither will the community. Well, no, the community has. The community has. For years. They've been accepting, D&C projects, they've been accepting, removal of the traditional police. They've been accepting of privatization of certification process. So there's a whole raft of issues here. So I don't know. I like the idea of it in some regards. I'm worried that it won't actually make the difference in the end. But, you need to get licensed to be an owner builder. Even to just do a small renovation to your house. Maybe there needs to be a process in place to ensure developers are licensed or trained. I don't know. What minimum education is there? But then you want people to start Well, you know what? For projects this size, yeah, maybe. When you're talking multi-million-dollar projects, sure. For a little, spec house or duplexes or maybe 3 stories, maybe leave that more to mum and dad sector, maybe where there's less risk. But for stuff like this, for the big projects that we've seen, where the issues just compound, take years to expose, and cost millions of dollars and can be really serious life safety issues, maybe they've got a point there. Maybe they have. So I would argue that it needs to be massaged and explored to greater detail, but there are definitely a lot of issues. I still think the way we procure these buildings, I think design and construct on frankly, habitable buildings, I think that opens up too many conflicts of interests, too many potentials for corner cutting to go, too many opportunities for stuff to get hidden. I mean, it's hard. It's already hard enough as it is. So when you don't have the independent umpire between the contractor and the developer, who used to be the architect, or even the project manager should be, and the certifier should be completely independent off the side, it all gets really messy. It all gets really messy. So I'd say it's a good start, but it needs to be carefully considered. This needs to be carefully considered. Let me know what you think in the comments, guys. I don't think this is the solution to the problems that we've got in the industry, but at least it's shedding light. At least people are starting to talk about these things, which is good, which is really good. Anyway, guys, please like, share, and subscribe. Ding the bell to see my videos, and I will see you later. Have a nice day. Oh, wait, got a transition.